Okay, Dr. Elizabeth Minnich, thank you for joining the show.
I'm delighted to be here, Sean. Thank you.
Now, Dr. Minnich, you have a long list of bona fides. You've been appointed Distinguished Fellow with the American Association of College and Universities. You have been a core professor at the Interdisciplinary Union Graduate School, a visiting scholar at the Getty Institute for the History of Art and the Humanities, and the Hartley Burr Alexander Chair, Philosophy and the Humanities at Scripps College. You also have a upcoming book, and I want that to be the centerpiece of our conversation. What does it mean to be human? But before we get into that, let's do a little groundwork. How may my audience know you, and how did you get interested in philosophy?
Well, I grew up outside of Washington, D.C., and that meant when I was growing up that be, there were a lot of people from all over the world in my public schools and going in and out of our house. My father worked for the World Bank with economic development. So I grew up with a kind of wonderful sense of the array of humankind that I enjoyed thoroughly. It sort of never occurred to me that there was only one kind of human or one predominant or superior or anything else kind of human. And that was healthily, I think, because of where and when. I also grew up, I'm a very old person. I grew up in part during the McCarthy era when it suddenly became very dangerous um, to have certain beliefs, to have joined certain organizations in your past or in the present. That was the Red Scare when they were busy rooting out what they called communists. And people were hauled before Congress to the House Un-American Activities Committee. They lost jobs, people committed suicide, and there I was outside of Washington. My parents' friends were often questioned. My father was not allowed to leave the country for a while just because he'd worked with somebody they were after at one point, which is to say, really formative in my life was this great sense of the array of humankind, wonderful array of humankind, and what can be done to suppress, silence, and try to um, radically control all that wonderful communicating difference amongst us, and the great harm that can be done
Mm-hmm.
when people get scared of those differences or use concern about differences to rile people up and to turn on each other. People turned each other in. It was pretty terrible. So those would be the sort of twin, forces. I also love the beach. I love the mountains. I studied dance. um, I had a good, healthy childhood all around all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And you?
Yeah.
You grew up in the city,
I grew up in the suburbs, and
in
I
the
moved to
suburbs.
the city. Yeah, I grew up in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and then I
Oh,
moved
yeah.
to the city after I graduated, and I just kind of fell in love with the area. And I always kind of saw myself as a city person, so that's why I moved out here, and
Hmm.
it's been great to me.
Hmm.
I'm here with my fiance, got a
Hmm.
job, friends, and having great conversations like this. I couldn't ask for much more.
Oh, I love the way you get yourself wonderful conversations. I think that's brilliant.
Yeah, no, I'm trying. I'm trying,
I-
reaching out and trying.
yeah, no, this is great. And if you're a city person, then you have chosen to have all sorts of people and experiences and visual, um, particularly intense visual
Yeah,
experiences daily. So you like some kind of um, ongoing stimulation of many kinds, I would
yeah,
assume. Is that
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's definitely fair to say. I think that's fair to say.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Hey, where are you from currently?
Right now I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina,
Hmm.
um, which is a is growing still madly. People are coming from all over, and that's a good, healthy thing. Um, has a fairly diversified economy, which is also fairly healthy.
Hmm.
Um, and it's like 2 hours from the mountains and maybe 4 from the beach,
Yeah.
which is nice. And
Yeah.
Charlotte has a whole lot of wonderful trees that it has known to preserve. So it's a growing city, has many problems, of course, and it's made some smart decisions about being a good place for many different kinds of people to live. So
Hmm.
it's comfortable. It's a good place to live.
Yeah.
I like New York. I miss New York.
I mean, yeah, New York is great.
Yeah,
I love visiting.
yeah. If you've ever lived in New York or if you've ever visited a lot, I think I lived there for a while, and it's kind of like a first love. You know, you never quite get over
Hmm.
it.
Where'd you live in New York?
Oh, I lived on the Upper West Side when I was working at Barnard College, Columbia University.
Hmm.
I lived in Brooklyn. I lived in Brooklyn, just just across from Brooklyn, in Brooklyn Heights for a while. I lived in the Village, in West Village. I moved around.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
part of the fun.
Yeah.
The
No,
city has a
100%.
lot of neighborhoods.
100%.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get into the book a little bit. Now, it's coming this fall, correct? Is there a date set for it yet?
Well, the last I heard, they were muttering about February, but we're working now on the production, so maybe we'll get it out sooner.
Hmm. Yeah, and this is out of Temple University Press.
It is indeed, and it is
Yeah.
actually presently orderable, um, including from Amazon. But if you get it from Temple University Press, from their website, there's a nice pre-publication discount. So people should know about that.
No, 100%. I'll
Yeah,
definitely be picking it up.
yeah.
Let's get into the thesis a little bit. So, what exactly is the book about? Like, what are you trying to do with the book?
Oh, I am with this book, as with each of my books, trying to understand something. Each one has led to the next. So this one grows out of the ones that preceded it. All of them, I think the best way to put it is to say they have at base the fact that maybe I never grew up. I never understood, certainly when I was a child, and I think this is true of many, many children, why people would be unfair, why they would be mean, certainly not why they would be cruel, why they would harm each other. I never understood it. And because, as I said, I grew up in a place where there are a lot of people from other countries, I saw people picking on other folks that they didn't know what to make of. And I used to have to try and intervene.
Mm-hmm.
Anyhow, this troubled me my whole life. So I've been trying to comprehend. And then there's an enormous amount to say. Um, with what does it mean to be human, I have sort of arrived at the question that I think underlies a great deal of how we manage to go wrong with each other and do the terrible harm that I call evil. The book before this was the Evil of Banality. Um, I've been trying to understand how we can do harm individually to each other, but even more as I grew up and got to know the world better. Unfortunately, it has its glories, it also has its horrors. Um, I've been trying to understand how we could do evil to each other, which is to say, harm doing on a grand scale. And I've had in my mind throughout, what were they thinking? What are we thinking when we are part of systems that enable us, not so much force us, not so much require us, but that enable us as a normal thing to do harm to other people? Um, I'll do something just quickly with that and then come back to this specific book. These are the questions that are in play variously in each of my books. What's going on here? How can we think that way? What's wrong with what our minds are doing? I should say there that one of my convictions growing as I've done this work over the years is that we are creatures and creators of meaning, that minds matter enormously. Our minds are how we make sense of the world. It's not a matter of you think too much. Oh, she lives in her head. Oh, an intellectual, well, entirely out of touch with reality. All of that, this notion of cutting off our minds as if they were insignificant in how we relate to the world is one of the greatest lies of all. Our minds are how we take in the world and make a world out of sense data, out of raw stuff. So I care enormously about minds and the sense we're making of things. So I have always wanted to know, as I said, what were they thinking? What are we thinking when we are doing great wrongs, such normalized great wrongs? And what does it mean to be human is a core question. What does it mean to be human that we can and do participate in the doing of great harm, in systems that are harmful, like enslavement, like the privatization and domestication of females, like child labor, like exploitative labor, injustices in the world. How do our minds allow us to do that? What's the sense we're making? Well, clearly something that's going on is that we have some sense of what it means to be human. We have some sense, if we're on the harm doing side of that, that we should do that, that we are allowed to do that, that we are not of the victim sort, that we are not of the exploited sort, that there are some kinds of human who can participate in systems that are harming others, like working people who are enslaved, like exploiting workers, like taking money away from starving children. All right, there's something that's telling us that's okay for us to do it, and that's rooted somewhere in what we think it means to be human. On the other side, it's rooted in what we think they are. They're human in some way that keeps us from feeling implicated in the way that identification, and empathy, imagination make possible. There's some way in which we've bracketed them off. So through the asking, what does it mean to be human? I'm trying to say that's a question we need always to keep asking, because when we get it wrong, and I will say there are ways we get it wrong, I will name some mistakes. When we get it wrong, we are very dangerous indeed. So that's what this book is about. Mistakes we have made, it's a big, huge collective we, that are deep in our languages and culture, that enable our participation in what I call extensive evils, the ones that last, the ones that require a lot of people to do them. Mm-hmm. So that's the book. As I said, it progresses from all the others, and it now focuses on this question that we had better keep asking.
Yeah. Yeah, so it seems like what you're suggesting is that many people assume that things like genocide and slavery come from, let's say, hatred, but you seem to be saying it's more so philosophical errors. Can you explain that relationship?
Yes, and thank you very much, Sean, for noticing that and bringing it up. It is very important, and it is also part of my motivation in writing these books and emphasizing that we are creatures of mind, that meanings matter, minds matter enormously. When I started looking for explanations, or in any case, interpretations, some kinds of responses to the question of how can we do such things, what comes up is are all kinds of responses, but they're almost all not mind responses. They will say they come from, the great harms come from hatred, fear, hatred because of fear, something deep in our, people like to say, a reptilian brain, some leftover, some atavism, It comes from sin. We're flawed creatures. We have this. It comes from the id. We have a sort of a lower consciousness. We go all kinds of around the meanings we make of the world and the people we're harming and ourselves in it. And no, I do not believe that the extensive evils, the ones I'm studying, an evil of banality, and then moving further into thinking more about in this new book, what does it mean to be human? It's not possible for millions of people, hundreds of thousands of people, tens of thousands of people, as when enslavement is a system, an economic system on which a whole culture depends, and the sexual violation of the vulnerable is acceptable and happening, or said not to be acceptable but not stopped, on the vast and international scale that it is, and exploitation of labor. And so it's not possible for these things to be done by many, many people as normal things, normalized things over time. And they are. There aren't enough moral monsters amongst us, Sean, to do these things. There
Right.
aren't.
Yeah.
Hitler all by his little self, You know, Napoleon didn't win his wars. We call them the Napoleonic Wars. That little man did not do it all by himself. They cannot do, the single people, the moral monsters, the great leaders, whatever we call them, supreme leaders, by themselves, they cannot do the extensive evils.
No.
Individuals and small groups can do what I call in the earlier book intensive evils. They can and do. It bursts out, it's extraordinary. What I'm really after now is the ordinary evils, and that requires something other than possession, madness, hatred. You cannot go on killing people day after day after day as your job, or as in Rwanda for 3 months because it's enabled and because that's the policy and because it's the work that you do, as people told me when I did some work with Rwandans. It was a job. You went and you did it. And then you shared the spoils and you went home. That's what we find. Okay, that's not madness. That doesn't come from these things that allow us to say, sort of, I didn't do that. They didn't do that. Something took me over. No, no, no. We do it because our minds make it possible, and shared. Does that respond to what you wanted to be asking, Sean?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think you brought up a good point that there's, and I've always said this, or at least thought this, there's
Mm-hmm.
very few evil people in the world. I feel like
Mm-hmm.
most of the harm in the world, in my opinion, comes from bad incentives. So you take something maybe a little bit less extreme, but still consequential, the social media companies, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're creating algorithms that, in my opinion, are destroying our societies, right? They're polarizing our people, and they're getting people addicted to these echo chambers, and it's feeding them bad information, and that has real consequences in the world. Now, they're not doing that because they're these mustache twirling evil individuals that want to see society burn. They're doing that because of the incentives. Like there's a profit motive to have people stay in their echo chambers, stay on their platforms for as long as possible, and constantly feeding them gratification, right? And as long as the incentives are there to continue to do that, then well, that's what we're going to see.
No, yeah, we are thinking along communicating tracks. Absolutely. Um, I would do with incentives. I think there's no question about that. And then I would also sort of surround it with concentric circles of meanings, because for an incentive to work, it has to be already in our meaning system as desirable, right, and recognizable by other people.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's an incentive, when it is an incentive to um, make a great deal of money, let's say, however you do it, if that's considered success, that's a very broad meaning system in which many more people are participating. you have to take then, so you have to work through the whole culture and watch where we are making some fundamental mistakes in how we're thinking about what the meaning of a human life. And I mean meaning. I should just say that for a second, because we're playing with meanings here, Sean, right? As you were with the notion of it means that they're doing this with incentives. An incentive gives it meaning. Meanings are not truths. Truths, we have to look for the meaning of truths. Meanings are how we communicate and find significance and connection in things together. If I have a private meaning, I'm going to be called nuts. That's what it means to be psychotic. We have labels for that. I'm not communicating. Meanings are shared. And people lose their sense of meaning when they're isolated and so forth. Anyhow, we don't have to go way into that. But once we get into the realm of meanings, as you just did, I think rightly, absolutely, and I'm sure you have others that you would work on too, that what makes the incentives meaningful takes us to other questions. So we unfold from there. How have we made these things, and how do we keep these things meaningful for people, admirable, something that makes them feel worthwhile in their lives? Because they can't do that by themselves, not on that scale. This is also all of us. So when you come back to what does it mean to be human, well, what does it mean? Does it entail anything about our moral relation to other individuals and theirs to us, for example? Something other than the financial? I mean, once we start asking those questions, we're going to the kind of conversations you like to have, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
No, 100%. And I think you kind of made a good point that meanings aren't truths.
Mm-hmm.
But I asked the question then: what are truths? Like, where does our moral truth come from, in your opinion?
Well, that's one of the things that I spend some time on in the book. People will choose different locations for their moral truths. There are traditions all around us in this country and certainly around the world where there are moral truths, not just meanings, truths that are established and are there whether we know them or not. And, it's a very serious matter to deny them. There are consequences to
Sounds like you're
denying
talking
truth.
about moral realism and consequentialism.
That's one.
Hmm.
That would be one. If you went to consequentialism, you'd look for the moral truth and the consequences of your act, right? And how many people are affected. So you try and do the greatest good for the greatest number, for example. And if there's no set truth to it, but there's a guideline to what you look to measure it, in effect. Some people will put their moral truth out of this world in some transcendent realm. That's the favorite move.
Hmm.
because then it can't get messed with. Then you can have certainty. You've got a sky hook. It's up there. And you may not be able to find always how to connect to that, but it's there. And there's usually somebody around who's willing to help you because there are various kind of established religious and other establishments that will help you connect with that. And we dream of that as moral creatures insofar as we want to be in any way moral creatures, which is to say good and caring and responsive to others and to reality, respectful of others and of ourselves. What we crave is certainty. We want a truth. Tell me what to do. The hard thing is to make a judgment where you're not sure. And you have to sort of try to do it. So, and then you can get judged and you can make a mistake. So some people will look for their moral truth above that's transcendent and see if we can find some way to connect with it. Maybe through a pope who's infallible and will tell us. Maybe through, intuitionism, I might know for myself, or if I'm Protestant, to reach it through my conscience in some other way. Then I've got it and I'll know what to do. We know that doesn't actually resolve everything. You still have to make particular decisions, but that's the quest. All the way to like as you said, consequentialism and utilitarianism, the sort of practical modes that say, well, we try and here are some ways to evaluate. Here are some standards, here are some principles. The tricky thing about moral truths is that whether it's moral or not is always going to be a judgment. It isn't a fact. We have not defined it as a fact. So it keeps eluding us, particularly in an age in which science is worshipped as truth, because science was defined as based on fact, not value. So insofar as we look to science for truths, for facts, for empirical measurable quantities, we can't get to value.
I would push back on that a little bit. I mean,
Okay.
if you're trying to understand what is true,
Mm-hmm.
and you have all the facts that there are,
Mm-hmm.
how can you not know what's valuable based on information? What else would be missing to know what's valuable? And whatever you insert, is that not another fact that could be learned? And if incorrect, then that itself is another fact.
What makes something valuable, Sean?
There's a lot of things that can utility, scarcity,
Mm-hmm.
its relationship to you, but all
Scarcity.
of those things are facts.
Scarcity is, I would say it was a descriptive term, that there are facts that we would sort of marshal to say this is now called scarcity. And then you can go looking for facts and you can look at them. Why would you want to do that? Why would you be concerned about or interested in scarcity?
Because people value scarcity, right? So things are valuable to other people because of how rare it might be, and you can utilize that. You can use that to your advantage.
So you mean scarcity in a very specific way. You're thinking market.
Yeah,
Because scarcity, of course, can also mean precarity, lack, poverty, not enough, not enough, and therefore be connected with difficulty and suffering and the inability to spend money on this rare good that the market.
100%.
Right, right. So it's a term that has a great range there. When you're using it, if you say it's a value, you're saying it's a good thing. You'll stop me if I'm being ridiculous. Am I wrong? When you
I mean, yeah.
wait,
I mean, it could be values could be good or values could be bad, in my opinion.
okay. And how would you know which is which?
Uh, Based on all the consequences of what we're talking about.
Okay, so you go to consequences, and how do you evaluate whether consequence is good or not?
It depends on the situation. Um, it can be difficult depending on the situation, but I think the punchline is that there is an answer. Now, whether or not we're in contact with that answer, and that's kind of irrelevant to the evaluation, right? We could. I use this example all the time, and people familiar with me, they'll be familiar with this as well. It's kind of like asking the question, how many birds are in flight right now? Right? It's not that we'll ever know the answer to that, and it's forever changing. It's the fact that we know that there is an answer, regardless of our ability to calculate it. So
Mhm.
I get at what you're getting at. How do you evaluate consequences? Depending on the situation, it can be very difficult, but there's always an answer. There's always consequences to anything you're evaluating.
We could say there are always consequences. Um, to evaluate has to do with value, and that's a loaded term. I think what I would suggest is if we were to pursue this, I'm going to use another category from my work, if I may. Um, there are enclosures of mind, circles of thought within which we think. And within those enclosures, we can do evaluations. I can do a market analysis. I can do an empirical analysis. I could take a step over elsewhere and do a moral analysis, in which I'm saying, okay, this is successful. in market terms, but over here in my moral circle of meanings with the people I communicate there, the language we use, the kind of things we focus on. I can do what you did with the social media companies, and I could say, but it's wrong what they're doing. It's successful in these terms, market. Over here, we have some serious questions about it.
Mm-hmm.
So we've evaluated it in two different terms, sets
Mm-hmm.
of terms.
Sure.
Yeah. So I would want to say that we have to be, when we're thinking about questions like what it means to be human, which have implications, many, 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 as you say, many consequences
Yes.
and many implications. Um, One of the things to keep a careful eye on is sort of which frames of meaning we're asking, within which frames of meaning we're asking those questions. And my move then, we're trying to articulate our different patterns of conversation here, Sean.
Yeah.
They
I love it.
overlap in nice ways. I know, and they stimulate each other. But we want both of them out here, which
Mm-hmm.
is part of the fun of having such conversations. Um, One of the things that I would want to do with that move over to the side to the sort of multiple frames of meaning is to be able to say, first off, there is no one answer, which is one of the most important points of my book. To begin to think there is one or even one sort of answer is to shut our minds off. It's to move into boxes, already there, most likely, although they might get deeper or more complex, instead of being able regularly to bump into something that in which we say, oh, wait a minute, that's different. What do I do with that? Right?
Mm-hmm.
So that we keep thinking. I mean, one possible response to one of the few I'm comfortable with is any kind of a response to that would stop the question of what does it mean to be human is that we're creatures who ask that question, who can ask that question, and we can change its meaning. Because I would say it doesn't have truths, it has meanings, or it has some truths, certainly empirical,
Mm-hmm.
physiological.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it has moral truths, we would disagree on that across, I don't know whether you and I would, but one may
Mm-hmm.
disagree. Different religious traditions and so forth, different sciences. So I want to keep this sort of shifting plural of many forms of meaning that challenge and enrich each other rather than any one taking
Mm-hmm.
over. That if there's any message to my book, it's watch out for singularity.
Right.
That route is supremacist.
Yeah. Yet I still want to come back to my original question because
Okay.
it was a bit of a pivot, and I like the conversation, but I want to come back to where can you derive value from other than facts? If you knew literally everything there was to know in the universe, how would you not have value from that? How could you not make that jump to what is valuable? Where else are you deriving value from?
I would say from a different frame of meaning. Um, that hammer sitting there, I can say a lot of factual things about it.
Mm-hmm.
I can't say anything about whether it would be right or wrong to use it to kill somebody rather than to drive a nail.
Mm-hmm.
That's not factual about that thing there. That's a different kind of statement.
But if you were to list all the consequences of what would happen if you were to do that, um, would that not give you some moral answers?
Not necessarily. Not
Okay.
necessarily. There certainly are people who can, if you adopt the view, for example, of eugenics, which has some factual basis, which is to say, as people say, we can breed better chickens, so why wouldn't we breed better humans? Eugenics is a science, EU from the Greek means good, as you know, euphoria, and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So eugenics means, in effect, good breeding. And we good breed all the time, we humans, in all kinds of different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Eugenics developed as a notion that, well, let's breed better humans. Huh? How do you know what
Mm-hmm.
a better human is? Who decides?
Mm-hmm.
Which kind of human is
Mm-hmm.
better? Who are
Mm-hmm.
you going to empower to make that decision?
Mm-hmm.
I People can go through the science of eugenics of genetics. Every time you choose something as something to breed for, you're making a different kind of choice from what you can do because you know the facts and the consequences of doing this specific act to this specific thing that can be evaluated on that flat plane.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to...
But on that point, though, to my ear, what I hear you saying is you're listing all the negative consequences of eugenics. So you're just broadening the horizon of the conversation. You're saying all the complications if we were to actually implement eugenics on a broader scale. Well, who decides what makes a better human? Who's going to have the power to make these decisions? So to my ear, those are all the negative consequences of actually doing it. So you're really never actually stepping outside of consequentialism.
But you have to be able to judge the consequences. The people who were they still do. They're still around. But let's stick with the Nazis. They're handy. And most people know something about them. It's not like they're all gone or that this notion is all gone. But if you have an idea, as some people in our country right now have for some time, but they're much more vocal and visible than they have been for a while, that there are superior kinds, factually, they'll say it's factual, of human beings because they think they're factual grounds for saying superior, and they will make that argument. Since we have those grounds of what is a superior human being by their framing, by their meaning, let's breed for it. And that also means we need to remove the dangerous breeding stock that will make ours impure. We need to get rid of, with the Nazis, it was the Jews. It was also people with mental disabilities. It was the Roma, the Romani people. It was the Poles at one point. They wanted a pure, their definition, breed Aryan because they knew, they had scientists, they were sure factually this was a superior breed. And the consequence of that is you have to get rid of all the lesser breeding stock. If your facts that you've chosen within your frame of meaning, they may be facts within that frame of meaning, tell you we can do this. We can make a better human. And look, we know what a better human is. Here are the facts. They can do these things and these things. And these people didn't invent Western civilization. These people did. Faulty arguments, but they make them. There's so many openings, Sean, it seems to me, for choices that are non-necessary factually, where we choose which facts and we choose how to define a fact as distinct from the worth of somebody, for example, or the worth of something we thought gave somebody worth. Those are all choices that we make rather than fact, true or false. They have to do with meanings.
Yeah, it just seems to me whenever you bring up these atrocities, and again, I obviously 100% agree, those still to my ears sound like incomplete and consequentially incomplete pictures. They had a set of facts, but they were not considering all the consequences, or did not care about all the consequences of actually implementing what they're implementing. And to me, that's what makes them morally wrong. If you actually have a full picture of all the consequences and what that does to the well-being of people or any conscious being, not that it's clear, but to me, it's clear that that's where you would derive your answer from, right? And I don't see. I think all kind of moral frameworks are kind of smugly in consequentialism, because whenever you would want to pivot to something else, like you say, "Oh, we shouldn't study or take consequentialism too seriously. Let's focus on, for example, Kant's categorical imperative." Well, if we knew that following that would have devastating consequences, well, then it wouldn't make any sense, right? Every other moral framework is smuggling in assumptions about good consequences. So to me, you can always reduce everything to the consequences. And if you recoil from the Nazi experiments or their genocides, and what you're recoiling from is, in my opinion, the negative consequences of what they're doing. And what determines the consequence, like where the consequences come from, are from the facts of the matter, in my opinion. I mean, it seems like you push back on that. Where exactly do you push back?
Um, well, there would be a number of questions to be raised. First off, I should say that I think consequentialism is a very valuable calculus amongst many. I think it's a valuable one. But I think regularly one has to evaluate the consequences themselves as one is going. One can't say, oh, well, let's see, the Nazis have decided on the basis of what they take to be fact, their science of the time, what they should do is get rid of the impure breeding stock. Let's see what the consequences are. Well, the consequences are going to keep going while millions and millions, literally, as we know, of people are murdered.
Mm-hmm.
When are we going to say, nah, we don't have to wait to see the consequences?
But
It's an infinite regress.
is it a way of doing the math, or is it just a framework for moral knowledge? It's not that, you know, it's not that we know how many birds in flight right now. It's the fact that we know there's an answer, right? So it's not that you're doing the math and measuring all the consequences and here's the answer. It's just the fact that the answer derives from consequences. However, listen, we're just apes, right? We're just put on this planet with the abilities that we have. We're never going to be in contact with perfect knowledge and perfect understanding of the world. It's just the sheer fact that whenever we're talking about moral problems, we know the answer comes from consequences, even if we're right or wrong about the answer, even if we have the abilities to understand the answer, get in contact with the answer. It's not really a way of doing the math. It's just the fact that we know that it comes from consequences.
Okay. Okay. So really all you're saying is that actions have effects and we need to evaluate the effects.
Well, yeah, the effects matter. They always matter to
Yes.
conscious
Yes.
beings. Yeah.
Okay. Sure.
And you never
Sure.
step outside of that.
Sure. Sure. That's fine. And we still have to evaluate the effects. And the question is, in light of what?
Mm-hmm. And in light
Um,
of the effects on how it affects conscious beings.
and are there some ways of affecting conscious beings that are less good than others?
100%.
How do you know that?
Because we see it in the world. We see that, and you will always prefer certain states of consciousness over others, and I mean that's, yeah, you would grant that, correct?
That I personally would prefer
Well, anyone
certain states of consciousness?
over others,
What's a state of consciousness?
whatever you're experiencing at the moment.
Oh, um, well, that's unarguable. Okay.
Yeah, well,
Sure.
you can. Yeah, okay, so that's what we're talking about. That's the baseline. Just the mere
Prefer?
fact that you would prefer certain states of consciousness over others. If I were to put you in a certain state versus another one, that has effects, and you derive consequences from those effects.
Hmm. Hmm. What if I like um, torturing people? It makes me happy. Is that okay then? Can you put me in that state because I like it?
I would say no,
Why?
uh, because of the consequences of doing so.
But you were saying the consequence was my state of consciousness.
Well, you're not assuming that you're not the only person in the world, and you're not because you're doing it to me. There's more
How?
consequences outside of just your sheer pleasure.
Oh, where do they come from? How do we evaluate them other than pleasure?
This is where I would invoke science. So there's many studies, many branches of science that we use to understand the world. So how we understand the world is psychology, economics, anthropology, disciplines we can utilize to understand, okay, when this happens, what are the effects of that? And
Hmm.
what are the consequences of that?
You do know that every one of those fields has variously been built around the notion that there is one primary kind of human being to be studied and the rest of us are irrelevant. This was my earlier work, that one of the
Mhm.
fundamental errors that I found when we started talking about, hey, wait a minute, this, if I look at the shelf of great books, I suddenly came to and noticed they were all by a certain group of males.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting enough, they're not the only kind of human being, but they were all the great books.
Mm-hmm.
So I and others in different fields would say, what about women and in all our differences? What about other groups of males? And people would say variously, oh, well, yes, it's too bad. It was sort of unjust that they were not allowed to be educated and didn't write these things. We should do something about that. But in the meantime, these are the great books, which then invites the question, what is it that makes it great about the books? And how do you
Mm-hmm.
even know that if you haven't studied any others? Anyhow, bit by bit by bit, it became perfectly clear to me that, and many others, and this is part of what we're having this huge backlash against right now, because we changed scholarship and teaching
Mm-hmm.
and education on the basis of, if you're going to teach white male, largely Protestant, Euro American, privileged history, you ought to call it that.
Mm-hmm.
Because if it's Black women's history, you call it Black women's history. If it's African American history, you call it African American history. If it's disability history, you call it disability history. Why does only one grouping of humankind appear with no prefixes at all, as if it were the thing itself? So
Mm-hmm.
history didn't tell most stories. And you can't tell the story of humankind, which you present as inclusive. Then they said man, which they said was generic, and it wasn't. Actually, in fact, we had to make it generic, as with the US Constitution and independence and so forth. We had to work to live up to that. It wasn't then. If you have defined everything in your field basically of, by, and for that one group that thinks they're not out of malevolence, that's what they learn. That's what the social systems, economic, all the others supported. They have created these fields with these mistakes fundamentally built in. One name for that mistake is very simple. It's faulty generalization. You've
Mm-hmm.
generalized too far from too few. These people do these things. So that's greatness itself. No, it's greatness in this category, in this enclosure of thought. We have to
Mm-hmm.
move it back into its specificity. I can't go to virtually any field without finding still, because it took a long time for these fields to develop, that there aren't remnants of these old errors in them, which make it difficult. I would say to people, don't you think you ought to sort of add 51% of humankind, women and all our differences, and therefore also men from the excluded groups? If you're really going to talk about history with no prefixes, history, human history, and they'd say, well, I'd love to, but they don't fit. They weren't the generals, they weren't the presidents, they weren't you've heard all this. All right. They didn't get to do the great things. And to which there are many responses, including the ones we gave before. They couldn't have done all those things without lots of other people. Other people were always here. And how did it happen over time that so many people were excluded and devalued? That's a big historical fact.
Mm-hmm.
We needed to redo all these fields, which were based on what they thought were facts, and theories were built on those. I cannot go blithely to these fields and say, give me the truth about the consequences. Can't do that, not yet. And there's a big movement now, as you know, precisely to get rid of all that wokeness, get rid of all this actual truth that
Yeah.
scholars have been working on, to revert to this singularity.
Mm-hmm.
These are the real humans. This is the one kind of human. This is singular. This is supremacism. We're back there. Watch it. The roots of that, which is what I've been working on in these books and work on in What Does It Mean to Be Human? Those roots go way back to assumptions we have no idea we're even making. Built into virtually every field, built into our languages, built into our buildings, because that's what was dominant for a while.
Yeah.
So, no, I can't just move around and say, okay, I'll just ask these experts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you kind of touched upon this backlash that we're seeing against, I guess, what they call wokeism, and it's really center stage here in Philadelphia because we had the Trump administration. They are removing all these depictions of slavery
Great.
here at the National Mall and George Washington's house, and it's it's really insane what we're seeing, and there has been a healthy amount of backlash here in Philadelphia, and I'm proud of that. But yeah, the revision that we're seeing out of the administration and the desire to whitewash our country's history it's been despicable. They're doing it at the Smithsonian, and they're doing it across the country.
Yeah, yeah. And so much had been done, you know? And it was kind of like you had these sort of isolated points, like the tops of mountains, and knowledge was built around these, little isolated tops of mountains. And we were beginning to see the connection to the earth, to other people, the deep roots, the whole story. Pick your metaphor. So much more interesting, certainly more truthful. The truths before that were not truthful, in fact, because they were faultily derived. Simple mistakes. Generalize too far, then you get circular reasoning. No. So trying to close it back down I'm completely with you. It's quite horrifying. And it reminds us of the depth of those errors, because there are people who are vulnerable to being harmed by this reversion. I mean, immediately personally harmed, who have voted for it.
Yeah.
This is in our meaning systems. There are always haters. There are terrible people out there. But when it gets as big as this, it implicates much more than that. It's in our reflexes, our notion that, you have to have a singular leader. You have to have a strong man in power. Has to have his face on Mount Rushmore and everywhere else too, right?
Yeah.
That's this obsession with singularity. I've been tracing through this whole book of what does it mean to be human. How do we deal with all this chaos and this complexity of meaning, and in fact these rich, fascinating stories of a species that produces new ones all the time? Each and every one of us is unique. Our brains are unique. We are unique creatures, and there are plural. There's this huge craving to say, oh, we're all one. Let's lose ourselves in this bigger thing, and let's have a singular leader who is in charge. No, it's just, that's not about hatred. It's not about fear. Some of that's out there, but that's what a great leader is.
Yeah. Yeah. You really push back against rigid definitions of humanity. Which philosophers kind of informed your thinking on this?
Well, probably all of them in many ways, because if you ask enough questions, and you're not really a philosopher if you don't keep asking these questions and bumping into them. But I mean, I think you may know that I studied with Hannah Arendt, and I was her teaching assistant at the graduate faculty of the New School, and that's when I got most deeply into these studies of totalitarianism and so forth. Sort of the logic of singularity. When you take the logic of singularity and try to make it real, you are so going against reality, human reality, organic reality, the mess and fuss and bother of a world that's always reproducing and breaking down and renewing itself. And all that. You try to make it all one, like totalitarianism. You're just taking on reality, and it takes this huge, clanking, terrible machinery to try and remake humanity. Well, that's what she was working on. She was talking about the first course that I took with her was called Political Experience in the 20th Century. How did this happen? How did the world move into the totalitarianism? How did that emerge? So I became very interested and started studying intensely what I'd been involved with before, in the sense in working in civil rights and other rights movements, so forth, which is, how do we become much better at seeing that we're plural, and we're equal. We're not the same. We're not the same or different. We're equal. We can be equalized, which protects differences. So certainly Hannah Arendt. in many, many different ways.
Mm-hmm.
And she told me to do my dissertation on John Dewey. So I did. You did what she told you.
Mm-hmm.
She was usually right, and she knew me pretty well by then. And Dewey, of course, well, the opening line of Democracy in Education, I sometimes get some of these words a little wrong, but it's very close to this, which is the most notable distinction between the living and the inanimate is that the former sustains itself through renewal. That's the opening line of Democracy in Education. The closing line of this important book is interest in learning from all the contexts of life is the essential moral interest. So what he's done is put together in this book the idea that renewal, i.e. constant change, not radical erasure and rebuilding, renewal, communication, reproduction, organic, relationship, natality, as Arendt would say, birthing, the birthing of the new that comes all the time. This is how the living sustains itself. You get rid of that, you're in the realm of the inanimate, and you're talking about just trying not to get worn away. So, you can't renew yourself. You get tough, you get dictatorial, so forth. It's an interesting, striking model for democracy of constant renewal through this kind of relational pluralism, as we might say, communication.
Mm-hmm.
And the last line makes it clear that that's what morality is about. Interest in learning from all the contexts of life. Learning.
Mm-hmm.
That's changing. That's not thinking you already know. And all of the context is the essential moral, not creed, not answer, but interest. So you stay engaged and attentive. So that's, Dewey is magnificent on this subject. And I love that she sent me to write my dissertation on John Dewey. And then I did, because I lived in India for a year, to study classical Indian dance and Indian philosophy. And unavoidably, of course, I encountered Gandhi all over the place. And I read Gandhi. And there's a lot about Gandhi and such action, modes of action in this new book, because Gandhi wrought some remarkable changes when he figured out you couldn't come out of colonialism as a colonial people by challenging the might of the British Empire. They didn't have a chance, he said. So we have to call on different resources. It's a wonderful stepping outside of that which is oppressing you and saying, okay, what have we got? What can we do? And how can we think about being human and being in this world with other people differently? And then how do we act that way, attuned that way? All these figures are complex. I know Gandhi is complex in many ways. The political philosophy that he left us is quite extraordinary. And then there's, I read a lot of Baldwin at one point, and I consider him a philosopher.
Mm-hmm.
Profound thinker, wonderful writer. He didn't ever meet a category he wasn't going to question and open up. No,
Right.
just wonderful. The whole spirit of a kind of openness, interest in learning from all the contexts, and refusal to stay in the painful, restricting categories.
Mm-hmm.
Orwell, I tried to do my dissertation on George Orwell, but they wouldn't let me.
Hmm.
They said, yes, he's a very good political thinker. He's a wonderful political thinker, but he's not a philosopher. And I said, okay.
Which makes no sense.
Yeah, that's getting a little narrow, isn't it?
No.
Getting a little narrow. Fortunately, there was Dewey, but I did press the I pressed the limits. And Frantz Fanon has done some wonderful work, of course. And I think Toni Morrison. I go to Toni Morrison all the time.
Mm-hmm.
He's an extraordinary thinker, really extraordinary thinker. So I go where I find the thinkers, and they do tend to be people of very active. I think I'll say conceptual imaginations, so that they see boxes, as Toni Morrison puts it, You come to be able to see the fishbowl in which you're swimming.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as you don't see the fishbowl in which you're swimming, then you are in fact contained and lessened, and you may indeed be harmful
Yeah.
because you don't know that. So a fundamental, that's, and yeah, what does it mean to be human keeps coming back to keep asking it, keep stepping outside of it and asking it, because there's something we don't know. And not just it's already there that we don't know, we change. We change ourselves. We change the world. We will do so. So we better keep asking and hold the question open and join with other people in asking it rather than having any singular question answer. Did
Mm-hmm.
I go off too far there, Sean? I
No,
took
no.
off
I
with that a
mean,
bit, didn't I?
you covered a lot of good ground. I would ask you from the beginning, part of your speech, what would you oppose utilitarianism with? How do we avoid dipping into moral relativism?
Ah, well, to start with, I would have to say that the idea of a moral relativism does not horrify me at all. If interest in learning from all the contexts of life is the essential moral interest, we're going to be dealing with a lot of relationality. Things are going to be relative to each other. Our thinking needs to be relative to the reality we're thinking about and to others that are thinking about it. The phrase moral relativism sounds really scary and horrifying if you have a notion, well, it has its meaning in contrast to a moral absolutism where you can know and then you don't have to make judgments. You don't even really have to evaluate. You can know as a truth, not a meaning, that will tell you what to do as if you had an instruction manual. That would be, there's a craving for that. If that's what you have wanted, to avoid moral judgment of you and exercising it yourself, being a responsible moral being who knows that everybody is unique in each situation, requires thought again, because it's a little different, and we don't want to be just cookie cutting, with our chomp, chomp, chomp. I already know I am prejudiced. I'm prejudicial. I've decided beforehand. If we want to be attentive and responsive to the world, as surely it deserves us to be, and all of its people ask us to be, if we're going to be open and responsible to them, then we have to be willing to be in relation and relative and non-absolute,
Mm.
insofar as we can, which does not mean we don't take stands. Doesn't mean there
Mm-hmm.
aren't even things to die for.
But
It
how can you
just
take?
means,
How
good.
can you take a stand? How does one condemn anything if morality is relative?
It's a lot safer than knowing you know and therefore being ready to kill for it. We've had a
Mm-hmm.
lot of that in the world.
Mm-hmm.
People who have a lot of questions are far less likely to go on crusades and murder people.
Sure.
So,
But you would agree there are certain things to defend. Like in your opinion, is there ever such thing as a justifiable war?
you know, I wish I could achieve a full-blown pacifism. But here's because some things have to be stopped.
Correct.
Sometimes the only rational response to violence is violence.
Correct.
Understand that. Historically, I understand that. And then I want to say that amongst the other things that I have been learning and that is in these books of mine is that moral action needs to be on time. This comes from a wonderful book called Lest Innocent Blood Be Shed. But in any case, the point is people need to be ready to take action. One of the classic examples from pacifists is you can't put down your gun, ask people to put down their guns in the middle of a war. You'll just get killed and get other people killed. You have to be working before. You have to be working against these harms before. You have to know each other and build community and trust each other and be practiced and exercise your moral judgments, which will differ, and discuss them before. You can't wait until you have to use violence to fight violence.
Mm-hmm.
Then it's won.
Mm-hmm.
So to start with, the sort of, what do you do now? We've got Hitler. You're going to stop him? Yes, of course you have to stop him. Should have done it way, way back.
Mm-hmm.
Way back. It did not need to succeed. I mean, some countries it succeeded far less well. In Norway, they pretty well stood him off because they were ready. They had very strong teachers' union, for example, in Norway, and they had enormous respect for teachers, sort of like we have for scientists. They're, well, and yeah, this is in some of the books. Their school, their graduate school for teachers has status that MIT has here. This is big stuff. Very strong union, very committed to education, therefore very committed also to life and renewing life and sustaining life. And they stood up. They said, no, we won't change the curriculum. No, we won't teach what you're telling us to teach. Period. And Hitler didn't go into Switzerland because he was quoted as saying, as Hannah Arendt told me, in any case, I haven't researched this on my own. He said, no, we're not going in there because you could take all of Switzerland, and when you got to the last house, there'd be a housewife on the top floor pouring hot water on your head.
Mm-hmm.
Where they knew there would be resistance, they did not immediately go in. They took what they could take and turned people. And where people stood against them, even early on, they backed off very often. So to go to the abstract, you have to have war because there are terrible people. That's kind of, it's, to my mind, and in all this writing that I've been doing, it goes in this category of, but they're evil people who do harm. We have to, kill them. No, doesn't take us where we need to get.
Mm-hmm. So if I can jump in for a second.
So please. I'm sorry. I go on too much. I know.
It's all good. I agree with you 100%. So Hitler's invading Poland. We have to stop that. But you're, to my ears, appealing to something objective. So when does that stop? When do you turn that off? Because to me, that runs all the way through. Why is slavery wrong? Okay, the consequences, right? There's something objective that we're appealing to here, and I think you can extend that to every moral question. I mean, yes, we don't have all the answers in hand. Yes, people have, and here's the answer. Here are the consequences. I know the answers, and they've been wrong 100%. But again, they were wrong then, they're wrong now, and they're wrong objectively. And I just feel that just runs through to every moral question. When can you invoke relativism?
Well, the problem with the term relativism, I think, Sean, is that it has its meaning right now as an opposition to moral absolutism. I was trying to open some space between these divided absolutes. Mm-hmm. If you went to the extreme with moral relativism, it'd be kind of like private meaning. It would be kind of madness, right? It'd be out of touch, not in communication with other people. It would not be in relation at all. If it was sort of each time, and there was nothing to refer to. In your take on things, consequences, I would say effects. I would also say other things. But if you didn't have anything except that, no, you wouldn't know what to do. That's kind of madness. Sort of like the madness of moral absolutism, where you know absolutely, and so you can slaughter as many as you need of the people who disagree with you or who might breed with you and lessen your purity, that kind of thing. There's madness on both of those extremes. We don't need to do that. We don't need to move them into that kind of opposition with each other. Of course, there's a relationality and some kind of relativism when we're making moral decisions. For heaven's sakes, every situation, every individual is unique. They're not just replicas of each other. So we need to be attentive to what's in this situation, but that doesn't mean an isolation from all others any more than it means let's reduce it to just what it has in common with all others. We need to keep thinking. We need to stay attentive. receptive, interested in Dewey's word. If we're interested, inter est, to be between, inter, and est means being, to be between. We are unique creatures, each one of us, and we're unique creatures who can communicate. Both. So, I don't think you need to go to sort of a absolutized pole in order to draw out positions. We don't. That's abstract. We need to be acting in the real world with each other, as ourselves, as things present, with support, care beforehand to think together, and so forth. You've heard that from me. I've been saying it throughout. Let me give you something else, and then I'm sorry. I realize I'm trying to pour too much into this. We got a lot of books on the shelf. I'm trying to say, and this is a short period. And I have heard your position, and I don't disagree with it at all. I want to surround it with some others with which it stays in conversation, but you're doing that with mine too. That's what we do. This is good. We should do this. One of the things I will say about human being, as presently known, it's changing as we speak, which is something about human beings. In the old tradition, the dominant tradition, Western tradition, the phrase was man who is mortal, the singular abstract individual who will die, which sort of generated all kinds of anxieties and great works of art. This is in the book too, of course. Loneliness, isolation, existential terror, all that. Man who is mortal. Oh my goodness. Terrible, terrible, terrible. It is. However, one of the things that we're forgetting there wasn't even this word, natality. Humans are not only mortal, we're born. All the time. Born out of relation, into relation, unique, from communication. There's dependence. There's change. There's, if we think about birthing, in the rich meaning of birthing, we'll have the problems in the same stark, horrified, oh my God, I am going to die, that we do with obsession with mortality, only mortality. There's still an I, if you're in a culture that has one. And there's loss. This other dynamic that is also the case for human beings. Now, I have just heard recently, I expect you have encountered this too, and no, I've not researched it, that somebody or other, science, they've made the first entirely artificial human cell. Okay, there you go. Maybe we won't still be born. Maybe we will be made. And if we're made, people are going to be making choices about what kind of humans they're going to make. Who's going to make those choices? So, to say there's an answer to what does it mean to be human? No, except we have to keep an eye on ourselves. We're free, we're responsible, we're unstable. That's what it means to be free. You're unstable. You have to make decisions, have to make choices. And this is a very scary time. Many times have been scary. This is one. There's, as you were saying with your example about social media and so forth, people are remaking us, and we are variously collaborating. If we didn't buy that stuff, it wouldn't go on being made. So you could say that potentially this is maybe actually already, as you describe it, it sounds to me like one of the things I would describe as an extensive evil. So then what we need to do is get together and see what we can do. Let's not forget that natality has also always been a part. It went out of the meaning of man as reproduction and womankind did, to find out. And it has been coming back, and it potentially is transformative. Science is right there now with Frankenstein again. So, no, there are no answers. We just have to. I began thinking of morality as a project. As they say, democracy is a project. It is no one thing. We have to keep making it. You know the famous quote from Ben Franklin? It came out of the hall where they were writing the Constitution, and a woman said to him, "What have you given us, sir?" And he says, "A republic, ma'am, if you can keep it." It's a project. And it seems to me pretty much so is morality.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think those are great insights. What's one takeaway you want readers to have from your book?
Well, certainly that's one, to remember natality as well as mortality, which is to say, to remember relationality amongst unique creatures and the creativity that follows from that. It's extraordinary. I certainly would want people to remember that. And that's in stark contrast, coexists with this a desire for singularity, to be one, to be subsumed, to be part of. Let's all be one world, one kind. This is one leader, one truth. This is dangerous. Totalizing is dangerous. So I would watch out for the mistakes in the ways we think that we can find. I've found a lot. People will find others, but there's some very basic ones. We can keep an eye on our tendency to want to make things singular and lose ourselves in them, rather than learning to love and be with the organic that renews itself all the time.
Dr. Minnich, I will say one consequence of our conversation is that I will definitely be buying your book when it comes out. Can you remind listeners where they can find it?
Right now, they can find it on the website for Temple University Press, and it right now has a very nice discount for early purchase. So it's a good idea if you might do it.
100%. Dr. Minnich, thank you for joining me. It's been a great conversation.
Well, thank you, Sean. You are very interesting, and I really appreciate your working through the way you think about things with me. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, no, it's been great. We definitely have to do this again.